The rain was coming down like a warning the night Ethan Callahan vanished. It was October 14, 2009, and the Oregon sky churned with thunderclouds as if it too sensed something unnatural about to unfold. Ethan, 32 years old, soft-spoken, brilliant, always a little too quiet for his own good, kissed his pregnant wife Maya on the forehead and said, "I won't be late." He never came back. A rising star in environmental science, Ethan was en route to a climate conference in Bend, just 3 hours from their small town of Corbett. He was the kind of man who annotated the backs of receipts with sudden insights, who could spend hours watching the wind move across a lake and then talk for another hour about what it meant for glacial behavior. He was warm, if distant, loving, if distracted. And on that night, just miles from his destination, someone, interrupted the story of his life. The next morning, his car was discovered at the edge of a ravine. Charred. Wrecked. Unsalvageable. Inside, police found a burned driver's license, remnants of Ethan's conference notes, and a body so badly burned it was declared him after dental comparison, though not a single person ever saw the body. It didn't matter. The state declared him deceased. A closed casket funeral was arranged. Maya was 7 months pregnant, barely standing, eyes hollowed by disbelief. People brought casseroles. People whispered words like tragic, unthinkable, and God's plan. Nobody asked why there was no autopsy released. Nobody questioned the speed of the declaration. It was as if the world needed him dead more than it needed answers. That winter, Maya gave birth to a boy and named him Lucas Ethan Callahan, a child born not into joy but into ghost light, his father's smile captured only in faded Polaroids. The house grew cold. The attic collected dust. Maya tried to live. But the strangest thing, the detail that only she ever remembered, happened the night of the funeral. After the service, when everyone had left, she sat alone by the fireplace.
A soft knock, camarades de frondeur.
When she opened it, no one was there. But lying on the welcome mat, soaked in rain, was Ethan's old field notebook, the one that had supposedly burned in the crash. She called the police. They said it was probably a cruel prank. But on the last page of that notebook, scrawled hastily, was one line that made her freeze. "It's not over."
Tel Lucas, I'm sorry.
She never told anyone. Not then. Because deep down, Maya knew. Ethan wasn't dead. She could feel it in the way wind moved through their bedroom curtains at night, in the way their son stared at the sky as if waiting for something to fall back to earth. But where was he? And what had really happened on that mountain road? Somewhere, far away from Oregon, Ethan Callahan was very much alive, but buried beneath a different name, hidden by those who didn't want him found. And while Maya mourned, and Lucas learned to grow up without a father, the man they buried was carving out a truth no one would be ready for. When he came back, if he came back, it wouldn't be just to reclaim his life. It would be to expose something far darker than death. What if the dead don't stay buried because they were never truly gone? 15 years had passed, and yet, the ghost of Ethan Callahan never truly left. The town of Wren Ridge, Oregon, had slowly erased him from conversation, like chalk washed from a board, but not from memory. Lucas Callahan, now 15, had grown up with a hole where his father should have been. That absence shaped everything, the way Maya looked at him, with a mix of love and something deeper, regret maybe. The way Lucas sometimes stared at himself in the mirror, wondering which parts of his face belonged to a man who was never buried, only burned. Maya had done her best. She had raised Lucas on her own, taking on graphic design jobs from home, turning down every man who ever showed interest. Not out of some noble vow, but because something inside her had never stopped listening for footsteps on the porch. And then, on March 17, 2025, those footsteps came. Lucas had just gotten back from school, flung his backpack on the couch, and popped open a soda. The knock at the door was firm. Not aggressive, not hesitant. Measured. He opened the door and saw a man in a faded army green jacket, jeans dusted with dirt, and hiking boots nearly falling apart. The man's eyes were familiar in the worst way, like looking into a memory you buried too deep. Lucas didn't speak. His throat closed. The man looked just as stunned. He whispered, "Lucas." And that's when Maya entered the room. The cup in her hand shattered before it hit the floor. Her eyes met Ethan's, and the world shrank down to the thud of her knees hitting hardwood. For a full minute, there was no sound.
No screaming. No crying.
Just the weight of 15 years collapsing onto a living ghost. Maya scrambled backwards, pulling Lucas behind her, her voice shaking like her hands. Who are you? Ethan stepped forward but stopped at the threshold, as if afraid of crossing back into the life he'd once known. It's me, Ethan. But his voice was deeper, more cracked, like it had been scraped raw. I know this doesn't make sense. I know how crazy it looks. But I didn't die. Maya wanted to scream, to run, to throw every piece of furniture at him and demand he disappear again. But something in those hazel eyes, something she had memorized every night for 15 years, told her the impossible was real. Lucas stared, frozen. You're my dad. The man nodded. I was taken. In 2009. I didn't crash. I never reached the hiking trail. He looked down, swallowing hard. A van pulled up. Men with guns. I was sold, first for labor, then for something worse. His voice cracked. I escaped in 2018. It took me 7 years to get my name back. My face back. My freedom. He pulled a folded photo from his pocket, a burned picture of Maya and Lucas. As a baby, something Maya thought had perished in the fire. This is what kept me alive. Maya collapsed into a chair, gasping as if the air itself betrayed her. She couldn't look at him. Couldn't deny it either. Every cell in her body had screamed his name for 15 years. And now, here he was, alive, aged, scarred, and somehow still her Ethan. Lucas didn't know what to feel. He backed away, bumping into the wall. Why didn't you call us? Tell someone? The police? Me? Ethan shook his head. I was declared legally dead. My identity stolen, erased, manipulated. The people who took me made sure of it. They trafficked me across continents. When I finally got free, I didn't know who I was anymore. I didn't even know where I belonged. Maya stood again, slowly, as if gravity had changed. You think you can just walk back in here and, what? Be a father again? A husband? She was sobbing now. Lucas watched as the woman who had never cried, not even when they buried an empty casket, broke into pieces. Ethan dropped to his knees. I didn't come back to claim anything. I came back to make it right. Or die trying. The next few hours blurred. Police were cold. Neighbors whispered. A detective arrived and ran his fingerprints through federal databases. Ethan was telling the truth, though the report was laced with sealed documents, unexplained years, and redacted countries. The media caught wind, and the next morning, their street was lined with vans and cameras. Man declared dead in 2009, returns to family in 2025 ran on every headline. Maya refused all interviews. She hadn't processed it herself. Lucas stopped going to school for a week, avoiding texts, ignoring teachers. And Ethan stayed, on the porch in the yard, near but never inside. He built a fire pit in the backyard, silently fixing Maya's broken shed door, planting tomatoes where weeds once ruled. Every night, he sat by the tree where Lucas had once been rocked as a baby, notebook in hand, scribbling. One evening, Lucas walked outside. Sat down beside the fire. So, what were you like? Before you died? Ethan chuckled softly, surprised. I liked jazz. Took photos of moss. Collected coins for no reason. And I loved your mother so much it scared me. Lucas looked at him. She still cries at night. Ethan's jaw tightened. So do I. There was a long silence between them. Then Lucas asked, will you come inside tomorrow? Ethan hesitated. Only if she wants me to. Lucas nodded. She'll want you to. One day. And for the first time, Ethan smiled, not with his mouth, but with his eyes. It was small, but it was real. That night, Maya stood at the window, watching them, her son and the man who was once her husband, sitting side by side like ghosts learning to breathe again. For days, the air in the house felt like it was holding its breath. Maya moved through the halls like a ghost, quiet, mechanical, and always watching Ethan as though she expected him to vanish into vapor if she blinked too long. Ethan, on the other hand, stayed grounded by habit, repairing the back fence, tightening the loose doorknob he noticed on his first night back, even sweeping the porch in the early morning like he used to a lifetime ago. It was his way of saying, I'm real, I'm here. But the silence between them weighed more than all the words they weren't saying. Lucas hovered in the in-between, drawn to his father's stories but loyal to the mother who raised him alone. He asked questions when Maya wasn't around, about Afghanistan, about the day Ethan vanished, about why he never wrote, never called, never came home. Ethan's answers were fragmented, like a scratched record skipping between songs. He talked about the ambush, the explosion, the field hospital, about being listed as killed in action, tagged with another man's name because the dog tags were melted. And then he stopped. What he didn't talk about, what he couldn't bring himself to explain, was the 6 years that followed. He'd kept moving, haunted and hollow, changing names, sleeping in missions and shelters across the South, always convinced that going back would destroy whatever Maya had rebuilt without him. But it was Lucas's voice, now 15 and crackling with teenage fury and pain, that forced the truth out one night by the fire. "You thought it'd be easier for us if you stayed dead," he snapped. Ethan flinched. "I thought I was already dead to you," he whispered. The next morning, Ethan found Maya in the backyard staring at the tomatoes he'd replanted. She didn't turn around. "You buried us," she said softly. "And now you're digging us back up like that's not going to hurt." Ethan didn't answer. He sat beside her on the grass, knees stiff. They stayed there as the sun rose behind the house, painting their old life in new light. That same afternoon, the funeral director called. Ethan's presence had caused legal ripples, insurance fraud questions, social security confusion, and above all, a very public problem. A funeral was already underway. Someone, Maya's sister, had organized a delayed military memorial for Ethan, scheduled for Saturday, complete with a flag presentation, a 21-gun salute, and a closed casket burial. Maya hadn't known. Lucas thought it was cool in a messed-up way. But Ethan, hearing his own death ceremony was still on the calendar, looked like someone had punched him in the gut. He didn't want to go. Maya insisted. "You need to face what we lived with," she told him. And so, on the morning of the funeral, Ethan stood in front of the mirror, in a borrowed suit, his reflection a stranger in a borrowed life. The graveyard was crowded with uniforms, old friends he didn't recognize, and relatives who gasped when they saw him. The casket was already there, sealed, polished, heavy with finality. A photo of Ethan in his dress blues sat on a pedestal beside it. Maya arrived with Lucas at her side. She didn't touch Ethan, but she stood near him, silently granting him space that felt like forgiveness. The ceremony began, the words stiff and rehearsed, but when the commanding officer asked if anyone wanted to say something, Ethan stepped forward. The entire crowd froze. Phones raised. Whispers swelled. He cleared his throat and spoke, voice rough with years of silence. He didn't speak as a soldier or a victim. He spoke as a man who had tried to outrun grief and lost. He told them about the day he woke up in a tent with no name, how guilt built walls around him, how hope became a flicker he didn't trust himself to chase. And how love, Maya's love, Lucas's existence, had been the only map home. People cried. Even the funeral director wiped his eyes. And when the casket was lowered into the ground, Ethan laid a single dog tag on top, as if burying the ghost that wore his name. That night, they sat on the porch. Maya finally let her fingers rest on Ethan's hand. Lucas sat on the steps, earphones in, pretending not to listen. The stars blinked above them, quiet and vast. "So," Maya said, voice low. "What now?" Ethan exhaled. "I start over. With you. If you'll let me." She didn't answer, but she didn't let go of his hand either. In the silence, something old and buried stirred, something like a heartbeat. The funeral should have been the ending, but for Ethan, it felt like the trial had just begun. Word had spread like wildfire. The man declared dead had walked into his own memorial, stood beside his closed casket, and spoke as if death had been a misunderstanding. But there were no misunderstandings, not in the eyes of the people who had grieved, buried him, and learned to move forward without him. The aftermath was a chaos of emotions. His story was everywhere, news anchors debating his identity, internet sleuths comparing his voice from old videos to new clips, people swearing it was a government experiment, or a clone or a con. But beneath the noise, in the silence of his home, Ethan had to face the far more painful truth, rebuilding a life with people who weren't sure they wanted him back. Maya rarely spoke. Lucas vacillated between bursts of cold sarcasm and long, silent stares. Ethan spent his days trying to make himself useful, fixing shelves, replacing light bulbs, organizing old tools in the garage, menial tasks that gave him purpose but did little to rebuild trust. He found a box in the attic filled with letters Maya had written to him after his death. Unopened, unsent, pouring grief onto paper like a woman bleeding words to survive. One line haunted him: "You left without a war, but the war lives in our house every day." He sat on the attic floor for hours, head bowed, holding that letter like it weighed 100 pounds. At night, he wandered the house, ghost-like, unsure if he belonged in this life anymore. Sometimes he'd walk past Lucas's room and hear laughter, not at anything funny, but as if the boy didn't know how else to express the absurdity of the situation. One evening, Ethan sat down at the kitchen table with Maya, a bottle of red wine between them, half empty. "Do you remember the lake?" he asked quietly. She looked at him, eyes unreadable. "I remember drowning in it when they told me you were gone." They didn't speak again that night. In town, whispers followed him. A man at the grocery store called him Frankenstein. Another asked for a selfie. A child screamed when he smiled. Ethan, once a soldier, now felt like a phantom in plain sight. When he tried to help an elderly woman with her car, she stared at him like he was a hallucination. "You're that dead man, right?" she asked. He nodded. "I was." She paused, then smiled kindly. "Well, looks like you're doing a terrible job staying that way." That was the first real laugh Ethan had in months. Still inside the house, the silence from Maya and Lucas grew heavier, denser, as if grief had hardened into resentment. One night, Lucas exploded. "You could have written. You could have called. You weren't in a dungeon, you were in Montana." Ethan tried to explain the panic, the fear, the guilt that metastasized every year he stayed away. But the truth was, he couldn't. Not fully. He had broken the contract of being a father and husband, and now his presence only reminded them of absence. Maya finally snapped when she caught him looking through old photo albums. "You don't get to cry over what you left," she screamed. Ethan stood frozen, album in hand, tears streaming down his face. "I wasn't dead," he whispered. "I was just lost." But in her eyes, that distinction didn't matter anymore. Ethan began sleeping in the garage, making it into a makeshift room, a mattress on the floor, a radio, a folding chair. It felt right, in a sad way, like a man who had one foot still in the grave. But something shifted when Lucas opened the door one morning and sat beside him. What was it like, disappearing? Ethan didn't lie. He spoke of frostbite, of silence, of watching wolves from a mountain ridge, of wondering if the world was better without him. "It wasn't," Lucas muttered. "It wasn't better. It was just emptier." That was the first sliver of something that felt like healing. Maya still kept her distance, but that night, Ethan heard soft piano from the living room, the same tune she used to play in 2008. He stood outside the door, listening, not daring to enter. And in that quiet moment he realized something. He might never be the man he once was, or the one they needed, but maybe, just maybe, he could become someone worth forgiving. Lucas didn't speak to Ethan for days after the outburst, and the house felt like a cracked egg, fragile, full of sharp edges, waiting to spill. Maya went about her routines like she had a ghost in her kitchen, and maybe she did. Ethan had tried to fix the squeaky porch steps, cooked his famous lentil stew, even mowed the lawn, but it was like watching a hologram do chores. Nobody knew how to be around him, and maybe he didn't know how to be around himself either. One morning, Maya found a shoebox outside her bedroom door filled with old family photos Ethan had managed to salvage from storage units across states, wrapped in napkins, some water-damaged but recognizable. The three of them at Yellowstone in 2007, Lucas's second birthday with blue icing smeared on Ethan's cheek. A blurry one of Maya asleep on a hammock with Ethan watching her like a man who didn't know peace could look like that. She didn't say anything, just stared at them for an hour, fingers trembling, then tucked the box beneath her bed like it was sacred. That evening, a knock came at the door. A man in a crisp navy uniform, clean-shaven, eyes sharp, voice clipped. "I'm looking for Ethan Hale." Ethan stood, lips pale, and walked out to meet him. The man introduced himself as Colonel Ramirez from the Army Investigation Division. "You left in 2009 without proper debriefing, went off-grid, and were declared MIA. Now you're back in civilian clothes eating casseroles. Care to explain?"
Etanes Backstiefend en une fist.
"I didn't run," he said quietly. "I was told to disappear. Burn everything. No names, no returns." Ramirez smirked, unconvinced. "That op you were on? It's been declassified. People are asking questions, Hale. The kind that make shadows nervous." Maya watched through the window, a knot tightening in her chest. That night, Ethan sat at the foot of their bed, not hers anymore, but somehow still theirs, and told her everything. The last op had gone sideways in a Central Asian border town, and he was given a choice: disappear or be disappeared. He chose exile over execution, survival over justice. He'd been hiding under assumed names, working odd jobs, living in trailer parks, watching his own obituary get older every year until the fear dried up and only longing remained. He said he didn't come back for redemption. He came back because Lucas's college acceptance photo had gone viral, his son, his boy, holding up a letter to MIT. It was the last push Ethan needed. Maya didn't speak for a long time, and then she asked, "Did you ever stop loving us?" Ethan, red-eyed, whispered, "Loving you was the only thing I remembered how to do." The next morning, Lucas was in the garage, arms crossed, waiting. "You really built a whole second life, huh?" he said. Ethan didn't respond. "I looked you up," Lucas continued, pulling up a cracked tablet screen. "There are people online calling you a ghost soldier. Others say you're a fraud." Ethan chuckled bitterly. "They're all wrong, and all a little right." Lucas took a long breath. "I want to know who you were. Before, during, after. But I don't want half-truths." Ethan nodded. "Then start asking. I won't lie again." And they did. They sat there talking for 3 hours. Lucas asked about the nightmares, the fake names, the day Ethan walked into a bus station in Kansas just to hear the sound of people laughing again. Later, Lucas handed him a box, a pair of brand new boots. "You're not running anymore. You walk now," he said. Ethan laced them up, tears silently falling. The morning sunlight filtered through the kitchen blinds like a soft promise. Ethan sat at the same table where, just a week ago, his very presence had been a ghost's invasion. Now, the air didn't feel quite so suffocating. The silence wasn't hostile, just unsure, like a house learning to breathe again. He had barely slept. His eyes were red-rimmed but alert, watching the wedding ring Maya had left on the table the night before. No note.
No explanation.
Just the ring, a circle of gold that felt heavier than anything he'd carried in the jungle for all those years. He heard soft footsteps and looked up to see Maya entering, still in her robe, her long black braid resting over one shoulder. Their eyes met, and the world held its breath. No words passed for several seconds. Then slowly, Maya crossed the kitchen, pulled out the chair across from him, and sat down. "I don't know if I can ever go back," she whispered, voice raw, "but I don't want to keep pretending you don't exist." Ethan nodded, not pressing, not demanding, just listening, like a man who had learned what real silence was. She slid the ring back to herself, but didn't wear it. "It took everything in me to bury you," she said. "I spent years building a life on top of that grief. And now you walk back in like a question I don't have an answer to." Ethan finally spoke. "I didn't come to ruin your life. I came because I didn't want to die a ghost." Outside, the faint chirping of birds filled the stillness. Upstairs, Lucas stirred. That same morning, a letter had arrived at the Hale home from the Department of Defense, a final debrief. It was official now, Ethan Hale was not dead. And with that, came back years of pay, backlogged pensions, but none of it could pay for the time lost. Later that day, Lucas came down wearing a suit. "You're coming with us," he said, "no questions, only fact." Ethan looked surprised. Maya picked up her purse wordlessly. They were headed to the memorial that had been scheduled weeks before, the one that was to be Ethan's final goodbye, until he returned from the grave. It was already too late to cancel. Maya had called and said only, "We'll be there. He wants to see it." When they arrived at the hall, dozens of faces turned in stunned confusion. Ethan, dressed in his pressed uniform jacket, his beard trimmed, walked in like a man prepared to face judgment. Some gasped. Some stepped away. Some, like old neighbors, friends, even his brother Paul, stood frozen. The memorial had been arranged with a slideshow of Ethan's old life, his photos with Maya, his time in the Marines, baby pictures of Lucas in his arms. And there, in the center of the room, was the coffin. Empty. Covered in white roses. A minister stood at the podium and looked shaken. "I think, perhaps our guest of honor would like to speak." Ethan approached the front, heartbeat roaring like gunfire in his ears. He didn't prepare a speech. "I'm not sure what to say," he began, voice low. I guess I should start by saying I didn't plan this. I didn't plan to get captured, I didn't plan to survive, and I didn't plan to come home to find I'd been buried in the hearts of everyone who once knew me. He looked around the room, old friends, people who had aged 15 years without him. But I didn't come back from hell to hide. I came to say, I'm sorry. And thank you. And I hope some of you still remember who I was. The room remained quiet, until Paul stepped forward, now balding heavier, but unmistakably his brother, and wrapped him in a trembling hug. Others followed. Some cried. Some just nodded. One by one, people came up and hugged him like he was made of breakable pieces. After the crowd dispersed, Ethan approached the coffin. It had his name engraved. A birth date and a death year, 2009. He touched it gently, then turned to Maya and Lucas. I want to do something, he said. And that night he went back to the mountains, not to disappear again, but to return to the village that had sheltered him, protected him when the world thought him gone. He wanted to build a clinic there.
Something lasting.
I'm not the same man, he told Maya as they stood at the airport days later. But I want to spend the rest of my life becoming someone better. Maya held his hand.
Come back this time.
I will, he promised. And this time, she believed him. As the plane took off, Lucas and Maya watched from the terminal window, the sky stretching wide and blue above. Ethan Hale had been buried in 2009. In 2025, he came back not just to prove he was alive, but to become the man he never got to be.
And somewhere between the jungle and the church, between silence and truth, a ghost learned how to live again.